This is episode 59 of the Life in Norway show. Many of my guests have a relatively similar story, someone who chose to move to Norway in their 20s or 30s because of a job or for love. So when a story comes onto my radar that's a little bit different, I have to learn more. On a recent trip to Oslo, I read about today's guest's story on the journey down, and I'm grateful he agreed to meet for an interview just a couple of days later. Ernests Barons moved from Latvia to Norway with his parents at the age of just 9. But several years later, his parents decided to return to Latvia, but he chose to stay in Norway with his sister when he was still a teenager. We talk about the differences between life in Latvia and Norway, why he chose to stay in Norway as a teenager, and how life has played out for him. He also has an interesting tale about finding work, which is a good lesson for anyone looking to move to Norway. You can find out more about today's interview on the show notes page. Head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 59. Happy listening. I'd like to welcome Ernests Barons to the latest episode of the Life in Norway show. He is the head of partnerships at the Human Aspect here in Oslo, which is an international foundation dedicated to democratizing mental health and reducing stigma around the world. Ernest, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll talk about the Human Aspect in detail later in the show because it's a really fascinating organization you have here. But the reason really that your story caught my eye is that you moved to Norway as a child and you made some very interesting decisions as you got a little older. So first question, what brought you to Norway in the first place?
What brought me to Norway? Well, I guess my parents brought me to Norway. I was 9 years old in 2009 and the financial crisis hit the whole of Europe and of course the world. And my dad saw that he needed to do something to save his company. And then therefore he saw Norway as an opportunity. We had friends here. We had been in Norway for, I think we were in Norway each and every year for skiing since I was 3 years old, right? So I was used to Norway. But then Dad saw that as an opportunity to expand his business, to save his business. And therefore he was here for half a year and then he invited, I guess, the rest of the family over. So then for me, I was a child going to third grade. I was like, cool. New opportunities, not even opportunities. I didn't think like that at that moment. It was just a new experience, right? New adventures. So I just sat down in the car, got a kiss on my cheek from my grandma, and I was ready for new adventures. So yeah.
Most of the people I interview on this show, they moved to Norway as an adult. There was choice involved, normally for work, other reasons too, but that's the typical story we hear on the show. So moving as a 9-year-old, I mean that. Everything is different. You don't necessarily have a choice. You're brought here. You know the country. That's fair enough. But what is it like to adjust as a young person? And I'm thinking in terms here of learning the language and making friends. My perception is those two things are going to be easier as a 9-year-old than if you move here as a 29-year-old.
Definitely. I think for you are thrown into the school, right? You have no choice. And we moved to the countryside. So we were a small town of 3,500 people, I think. And I think that really helped. Because there is a certain coziness to it. Instead of moving to Oslo, where everything is more systemized, you have systems for bringing in immigrants to the schools. You have their own classes with immigrants, right? I was just thrown into a Norwegian class, I think we were 24 Norwegians and then me. And that really helped because the first day I came to school, I actually started singing in the choir before I went to the school because I guess choir is language. You can sing in whatever language, right? But I went to the school and the first question I got was do you want to play football in Norwegian? And I just nodded and said yes. And then one more came up to me and said, do you want to play football? I was like, yes, what is your obsession with football? But I later learned that Norwegians are really into football, which Latvians are more into dance, singing, and so on. But I think it really helped, because that was my first gateway into just being with youth, like other kids, right? And kids don't need that much of a language. Kids just need to kick a ball and say, "Do you play football?" And that's it. So I guess that helped me a lot.
You must have learned the language very fast.
Yeah, I think after 1 year I was speaking Norwegian already, of course with the huge accent, like Latvian accent. And because the first words, I came to Norway with 2 words. It was gulrot, carrot, and trampoline. Like, what is it? Trampoline. Trampoline, yeah. And for a kid, that was enough, right? Like, I was fed and I had fun. But I learned quite quickly. And I think, like, the nice thing with youth or kids is that they correct you if you say something wrong. While adults are often more careful of doing that because they are afraid of offending you, right? So when I said gulrot, a friend of mine just like, no, gulrot. And that was the way I learned. So I think that was also why I was able to learn Norwegian without accent. And 2-3 years later, I began speaking like quite proper Norwegian.
How was the education process? You were thrown into a Norwegian-speaking school. Did you? How long did you need to adjust? Like, was your education period extended because of the language issues, or did you manage to muddle through?
I guess I was lucky that came here in 4th grade, Norwegian 4th grade. My sister came in 7th grade, and for her it was a bit more difficult because that's already quite like you need to know Norwegian basically, right? But even she did it and got the best grades in Norwegian in like 9th or 10th grade already. Because so for my part at least, it was actually quite much easier. I came from Latvian school, which is like I think you can relate with British school. It was, you come home and you work with school like all night long. You go to school, come work. Like it's that hostel basically. While in Norway it was like you come to the school, you get one homework for the whole week instead of for each and every day, right? And I was like, for me it was weird, right? I was used to just like working with school each and every day, each and every night. So I asked the teacher like, why do we do so little? Why do we have so little school? And my teacher said, that's because we want you to be kids. We want to let you be kids. And it's really weird when a 9-year-old asks for more school, but I was so used to it, right? So for me, it was really weird. And that helped me. I guess that made it an easier transition because I was used to working a lot. So for me, working a bit more than the other students to learn Norwegian in addition, I think that was completely fine.
So you obviously settled into Norwegian life pretty quickly, pretty easily from what it sounds like. And then when you were, I think it was 16, this is a fascinating decision. Your parents made the choice to move back to Latvia and you chose to stay as a 16-year-old. That's probably going to surprise many people that your parents didn't say, no, you're 16, you have to come with us.
Definitely.
What was that period like? What was it, an easy decision?
I get goosebumps when I think about it. It's it was an interesting time, I would say, because I had just started high school, right? And for me, it was quite like a long time coming. I saw it coming that they would move back, so I had thought about it already. But for me, it was quite a quick decision because my sister had to stay here, or not that she had to, but she wanted to stay here. So my sister wanted to stay here and study architecture. And my younger brother, he was 12, I think. So he obviously needed or had to go to Latvia with my parents. And for some weird reason, I think I've always been, I guess, older for my age. So I think my parents kind of trusted me and to be like self-sufficient, I guess, or and also we had many good friends here, like family friends, one of the best friends of mom, and like so I think they felt some kind of safety that it would be good because I would live with my older sister and she had lived for her own already for 2 years. But for me it was, you have this almost like forced identity crisis, right? Like, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the Latvian or do you want to be the Norwegian? And you have to choose as a 16-year-old. And for me it was, I knew that I was a Latvian, but the thing for me was that I had all my friends here. And as a 16-year-old, you don't want to lose all your friends at once, right? It's such an important thing for your identity, for your self-image, I guess, and feeling self-worth, basically. That I saw that as my I had to stay here. I had to finish school, and then I could think. So I guess it was like quite a logical thinking, but it all came from something emotional, of course.
You brought up the topic of identity. This is a really interesting point. We had a podcast just recently all around this topic of migration and the feelings of identity and home in particular. So you've chosen to stay in Norway. Your life is here, your work is here, your friends are here, and yet you still immerse yourself in Latvian culture, as I understand it. So tell me a bit about that. And do you ever feel confused?
Yes. I feel the most confused when I'm at work, speaking Norwegian and in English, and suddenly my grandma calls and I need to speak in Latvian as well. That's the moment I really feel confused. But for me, Latvian, being a Latvian has been such an important part of my identity. Singing, dancing Latvian folk dance, all that is normal for Latvia. I've been doing that in Norway as well. So for me, it was, I guess, a no-brainer to keep nurturing the Latvian identity as well, and keep nurturing both of them. And therefore, at one point, I was doing everything I humanly was possible to do. I was dancing in Latvian folk dance here in Oslo. I was singing in Latvian choir for a while. I am still playing in Latvian hobby theater, and even singing in Norwegian choir. I was doing everything I could to just keep both the Norwegian identity and the Latvian identity growing, I guess.
There must be a Latvian community of sorts here in Oslo then, if you're able to do all this.
Yes, there is. And even though it isn't too large, the ones that engage in everything. So then you form this second family even, and those are mostly adults, but I've always liked to be with adults. So for me it was okay, because I could keep nurturing my identity, and then who I did it with wasn't that was of second nature, I guess.
Sure. You've already compared the culture between Latvia and Norway, or at least introduced us to the kind of cultural activities that are normal in Latvia, the singing, the dancing, and so on. What about the general lifestyle, the differences between living in Latvia and living in Norway? Obviously, you haven't lived in Latvia since you were a child, but what are some of the biggest differences that people find moving between the two countries?
A big difference between Latvia and Norway is when you come to Norway, even though Norwegians like to say that there isn't any, that Norwegians are so closed down and keeping everything for themselves, the usual typical example of sitting alone in the bus, right, and never talking to anyone. Even though that's a thing, when we moved to Norway, it was an interesting experience of openness. People were really open. People are smiling to you in the shop. Which isn't really a thing in Latvia. When you try to smile, and this was funny when we moved, or when Mom moved back, she was used to smiling to people in the shop, right, and just in the grocery shop. So she began doing it in Latvia as well. She was by the cashier and then just thank you, and smiled, and she met all these cold faces back, right? And she wasn't used to that because she was used to the Norwegian type of grocery shopping, right? So, and I've thought about it quite many times, why is it like that? Why are Norwegians more, at least outwards, they're more kind to you? And I think I've come to an understanding that you have a more organized life here. When you live in Norway, your needs are met, basically. Even if you are quite poor, when we moved to Norway, we were quite poor. We weren't financially stable, at least I would say. Still, your needs are met, right? And that isn't the case for Latvia. So I think that affects quite many things in the society, where you see because your needs are met, you suddenly can do more things for yourself. You can go out for a walk, even on a Friday or Thursday, go hiking, which you usually wouldn't do in Latvia because you come home from work like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening, and then you're so tired that you all like barely make dinner and then you go to sleep. So I think it's this completely different style of living, which is really fortunate here in Norway. So I think that's the biggest difference for sure.
So Ernest, you're now 21 and working full time here in Oslo. And the story of how you got this job, I think, is another very interesting story. And you started off as a volunteer, and now you have a full-time position. And we've spoken before on this show about the importance of volunteering in Norway. Definitely. But could you tell us a little bit about that story? Actually, first of all, introduce the human aspect to us, and then we'll come to your story next.
Yeah. So the human aspect is an organization interviewing people about their life's toughest challenge. So we film video interviews of people, how they overcame their challenge, they talk about that, and what they learned. Because everything is about overcoming, and we humans are really quick at, as soon as we're done with the challenge, we're like, oh, finally. Now I'm leaving it behind me, and I'm going forward. Like, now I'm thinking about the new me, right? The interesting thing is that our challenges define us in such a big way that if we look back and see what did I actually learn from that challenge, not only can it help me, it can also help others. So that's the whole concept. And that's why we have over 650 interviews now of people overcoming their challenges from all over the world with many different challenges.
Have you done a video about your biggest challenge?
I haven't. And that has been a constant conversation between me and my boss, right. Where he's like, Ernest, we should interview. And I'm like, no, my challenge isn't big enough, Jimmy. And I think that's quite normal to think. Like, we all face challenges because challenges are a part of the life, right? At least I think youth are distancing themselves from challenges these days. But I have always been so positive about the moving. You probably hear that now as well. Like, I've been so positive about moving to Norway, staying in Norway, even though my parents moved, that I haven't looked at it as a challenge, even though it has been loads of many small challenges. Like, when my parents moved, I sat there eating rice for breakfast, dinner, and for evening because I didn't want to ask them for money, right? My sister didn't ask my parents for money, so I didn't want to do that either. And when you add like some chickpeas to your rice, it actually tastes quite good, and with some soya. So I think, like, yeah, definitely my challenge will also, like, my story will probably come to the human aspect soon as well. But for now it's 650 great stories that are there.
So this is an interesting organization, and these videos, I think, will be of interest to my audience. And as I understand it, even with my English-speaking audience, the videos are subtitled into English.
Yeah, so about 400 of them are in English or other languages, and then about 200 or 250 are in Norwegian. And all interviews in the Human Aspect are understandable in English.
And you can find them at
thehumanaspect.com, or just follow on Instagram or Facebook, The Human Aspect. So yeah.
Great. And that translation aspect of the Human Aspect is how you got involved in the organization in the first place?
Yes. So as soon as my parents moved back to Latvia, I needed a job. Like, as I said, I had basically no money, like living off of rice. So I became a member of all these Facebook groups, looked at Finn, gave out my CVs to all of the local grocery stores and so on here in Oslo. And suddenly one day I saw this post of a Latvian, at least I saw that name, I thought it was Latvian. And saw that as an easy way in. It was Darta Storite. And it wasn't really connected to anything I had done before. It was from a film group, so it was they were looking for someone writing subtitles from Norwegian to English. And I thought, like, as every, I guess, I don't know, Latvian, I would usually say Latvian, but maybe immigrant would think, okay, I know some Norwegian, I know some English, I can do this. So I applied. I got like a video that I needed to subtitle, and I didn't know how to subtitle. But I had this deadline of 3 days, so I didn't really sleep those 3 days because I had school during the day, right? But after those 3 days, I delivered subtitles, and they showed up to be the best they received, because I really needed this job, so I really put my greatest effort into it. And they said, well, you're welcome to the organization. The interesting part with this story is that I was looking for a job because I needed money, right? But this organization was half a year old, and they didn't have any money. So for me in the beginning, it was like, yeah, you can. It would be amazing if you would contribute, but we will not be able to pay you until we basically get money, and that could have been a half a year. That could have been a year. So that made me keep looking for jobs, and in the end I found a job at a pub as a 17-year-old, and worked there as like this runner boy in Friday and Saturday nights for about half a year. And that was the transition period I needed to be able to begin earning money from the human aspect. I still don't earn like money from the human aspect. The salaries are still non-profit salaries. Let's put it that. But there is a reason for me staying in the human aspect. I saw that as you said, you have talked about voluntary work before as a great value for immigrants, and I think that's both for youth and immigrants, because I think the challenges when you come to Norway are quite similar for an immigrant as it is for a youth, like any youth in Norway, that you don't have experience in Norway, which Norwegians are really like. Norwegians need Norwegian experience and work experience for to give you a job, and also you might not have the qualifications for the job you're looking for, or for immigrants it's often you have too high of qualifications, right? But that put aside, with voluntary work you suddenly get I guess responsibilities that you wouldn't otherwise get, at least for a youth. Like for me, it was I got responsibilities of first making the subtitles, but then developing and leading a subtitles team as a 18-year-old, 17-year-old, just because I knew how to do it, and I was aspiring youth, and I wasn't paid enough, right? So they needed to give me something in return, and that was experience, that was responsibility, and nonetheless, it was also, I guess, a second or third family that I gained here. So yeah, that was, I guess, my story, how I came into the human aspect.
So what I'm hearing from you, Ernest, is that you would absolutely recommend volunteering to somebody who has moved to Norway, is looking for a job, is finding it hard to find one. I mean, from my point of view, it's also a great way to improve your language skills very quickly, and a great way to meet people and start to make friends. Definitely.
We have had many immigrants actually joining the human aspect, both Latvian and others, because, as you're saying, you learn the language so much quicker. Like the problem of, so my mom began working, right, in a Norwegian job, and that was how she learned Norwegian much more quick. While dad he was working with clients about stairs, or he was producing stairs, right, wooden stairs. So he learned Norwegian on stairs. So if you ask him anything about like trees and so on, he will give you the best answers. But if it's anything else, he won't. And I think that's the important part. If you actually meet people and if you talk to them, that's how you're going to learn. The textbooks can only take you so far, right? But then you need the last end, which is people correcting you, people like saying, no, you know what, that's actually said in this way, and that's okay. That's how you learn. That's how I learned. So I think that's also one of the biggest values, as you say.
Excellent. When you first moved to Norway, you said you lived in a pretty small place, and now, of course, you're living here in the capital, Oslo. What do you like about life here in the city?
For me, wherever I live, the most important part for me is the people. And I think the great thing about Oslo is that even though it's a capital, it's quite small. And everything happens like in the middle, in the center. So as the years go on, I meet more and more people in the everyday that I know. And I think that's my favorite thing about Oslo, meeting people I know. Because it's much more difficult. If you move to London or New York, meeting someone you know is like, it's a reach. Like you need, there's too many people there, right? Well, here I can go on the streets and suddenly like, hey, like someone screams, hey, Ernest, hey. And I think that's such a lovely thing about living in a capital where things happen. At least for me as like a youth, like it's important that I have events I can go to, and all the Latvian community is stronger, I guess, because there's more people here. I know in Bergen there's like the strongest Latvian community, but it's quite big in Oslo as well. But just knowing that you have people around you that will support you and help you if you need that. That's the best thing about living in Oslo. And it isn't really connected to Oslo in itself, because that could happen in any city, right? But for me, like the combination of the nature being right next to Oslo, like right next to my doorstep, right? People that I know being all around me, and I guess an environment that isn't too busy, that is quite calm, even though it's a capital. That's just amazing. I feel like that was a grandpa answer, but I'm kind of a grandpa, so that's
life right now in Oslo is basically back to normal, but for the last 18 months, of course, things have been quite different with various restrictions and so on. How has that impacted you and your work, and maybe the Latvian community in general? Did you find that a lot of people moved home during the lockdown? Or I should say moved back to Latvia. Moved home.
Well, it is, I guess, at least home. I think work-wise, at least for me, I was lucky enough to be able to continue working. But the biggest difference was, as you say, the Latvian community. And I think that was for all voluntary organizations, all communities based on voluntary work, the pandemic was really harsh, where Zoom only takes you that far, right? So all the human interactions were stopped, and that put a real stopper to all the like dance groups, theaters, choirs. Even though everyone tried to do it on Zoom, no one really wanted to do it on Zoom.
I can't imagine a choir working on Zoom because of the delay.
It's difficult. Difficult. I've seen many choirs, like I sang in the Silver Boys, the Sølvguttene, the NRK choir earlier, and I saw even they were trying to do it on Zoom, but it's difficult. It isn't the way you want it to be. So it has been really nice to see Latvian community opening again, even though back home in Latvia it's closing down big time right now. You see that the Latvian community in Oslo is beginning to build up again, and I love that because you will soon have the celebrations. Like it's important, I think. Like even though it's important to meet people, at least for me, and I think it's important for everyone, and for us that have this second identity from a different country. It is important to nurture it. My mom is Christian, right? And I don't really see myself as Christian yet, at least, or right now. And I asked her, like, what do you get from going to church? And for her, it was like a reminder of what she believes. It was a reminder of the Christianity. And I think it's kind of the same with meeting Latvians. No, I don't want to drag too big lines here, but it's kind of the same meeting your own community. It's you remind yourself of why is this identity so important to you.
Great. Just as you were talking, I was thinking we're actually, of course, meeting in person right now.
Yes.
Listeners might not realize that, but we are meeting in person. It's been so nice to actually do a podcast in person again. It's been a long time. And we're here at Mesh in Oslo. And as I explained to you earlier, Mesh is somewhere that I was a member of when I lived in Oslo many years ago now. And the place has changed completely. And the human aspect is based here. Could you just tell us a little bit about Mesh and why the human aspect is here and what you get out of being a member of this community in Oslo?
Yeah, co-working spaces are the best. And I think co-working spaces, when you move to a new city or country, are the best. Because for at least if you're an entrepreneur, but even if you're not, if you're like a freelancer or whatever you do, a co-working space can give you new contacts, can give you new networks, basically. And that's what it has given to us, to the human aspect. It has been a place where we can get help from other companies. You have companies doing everything here, like literally everything here. So you can always get help. There's always an aspiring community pushing each other to develop. And also for a new organization, it's a really great place to grow because we have like of the practical things. We don't need to think about the practical things. You have the meeting rooms, you have tea and coffee here no matter when you come, right? And it's 24/7 open, which is important for an organization working 24/7 and to stay alive and so on. So it's and of course, being central in Oslo has been important for us as an organization that interviews people that maybe travel far and that need to find us. And it's just practical, being in the center and being by the national theatre, I guess.
And this is, of course, where Life in Norway began approximately 10 years ago, although we are now based in Japan at a different co-working space.
Yeah.
So it's always nice to come back and see the beginnings and to see so many organizations thriving here.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
Right, Ernest, we are pretty much out of time, but before I let you go, I'll ask you the same 3 questions I ask every guest on the Life in Norway show. Some quick answers from you, please. What's the best thing about living here in Norway?
You know what? The best thing about living in Norway, for me, is to be comfortable. And sometimes I feel like I'm too comfortable for a Latvian. I need to have more challenges, but in Norway, you are comfortable. You have everything that you need, usually. And that is a great gift to a human being.
And the most challenging thing about life in Norway?
It would be the same. You can be too comfortable, and I think that can stop you developing. That can stop you thriving for something, which is a different, I guess, mindset. But yeah, being too comfortable can be challenging as well.
I think this is possibly the first time someone has given the same answer to those 2 questions. It's interesting, but I do completely understand your point.
Amazing.
And your favorite place in Norway? My
favorite place in Norway is, I don't want to be cheesy, but it is definitely the small town I went to. We moved to when Aurskog is my favorite place. It's just the people. It's all the places I've grown up. It's just amazing.
And do you still visit there?
Yeah, I was there last 2 weeks ago actually, because my parents came over, and then we went there to just visit old friends and so on. So it's just amazing.
And remind us one more time, Ernest, where can we watch some of these videos that the Human Aspect makes?
Yeah, so if you feel like you have a challenge that you don't know how to overcome, right? We all face challenges, either it be anxiety, depression, or even grief, like the most normal, sadly, challenge we face as human beings. Then seeing others talk about it and how they overcame it can give you hope. And that's what you'll find at The Human Aspect, both on Instagram, Facebook, and of course, thehumanaspect.com.
Fantastic. Ernest, this has been truly interesting. Moving to a new country as a 9-year-old, deciding to stay at only 16 when your parents move away. It's a truly fascinating story. Thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, David. Thank you.